Good evening. We are in Acts chapter 10 tonight, but we want to tell the stories to you. There is two men that normally would not cross paths anywhere in life. They would never be on the same guest list for the next party. They wouldn't certainly put each other on the guest list. But both are godly men. Both are men in which God is using them fundamentally to bring change to their world. One we know very well, that's Peter. But another one is Cornelius, who is a centurion. And so let's just talk about Cornelius first, because God brings a vision to each of them that doesn't give them a lot of data, but gets them moving towards each other, because he's got something in mind, God does here, that's very unique, and by the way, has changed your life today. These two men meeting is a fundamental fulcrum point of change for you and for me and for billions of people. These two men. So let's talk about these guys. Cornelius first.
Yeah, just a small note on that is you said that God fundamentally changed these two men's lives, and I want to just play off of that a little bit, add to that. He used them to change each other's lives too. Like, it was like, yes, he really changed them, but then it was like the icing on the cake, or the last.
That's a really good point. I would add to this that both of them could never have gone to the next steps.
That's right.
Without each other.
Yeah.
They each needed each other to be into the next steps and plan of God for them.
Yeah. And now
which changed the world.
For exactly for us now, like you were saying, like it's crazy.
So this is one of the key meeting points in human history, right here with these two men. Cornelius.
So he was a centurion. He was, the Bible tells us he was a God-fearing and very devout man. He already had a relationship that he'd built with God, and he was leading his family in that as well. And so at this point, God sends an angel to Cornelius, and he responds with fear, of course, which is understandable. And the angel says to him, like, your prayers have been heard by God. Like, God's paid attention to your prayers and your gifts for the poor.
And that's something I gotta think is kind of crazy, because he's a centurion, which means he oversees at least 100 soldiers. And in my mind, the Roman centurions, like, you're not in that position because you're soft. Right?
He wasn't,
Like, you got to earn that position, and he's a hardened soldier, and yet here we see he's praying to God regularly. He's giving to the poor. Like, how does that work?
A good heart.
And that's his love and devotion. And I think his life has set up the reason why God chose him for this vision, right? He has obviously a disciplined life, to be a centurion, to be in the position he's in, to be respected. He goes on later when he's talking to Peter about that, or his messengers say, like, all the Jewish people like respect him, right? Which is huge. And so I think for us, we need to know that our little decisions and obedience and discipline in our life do not go unnoticed by God. They are important, and they're setting us up for God's work too.
Yes. So God had really done a work in both these men. But Cornelius we're just introduced to. But we have enough window to see that, comes from a pretty hard world, but has a heart for God and people, because it shows up by how he helps people, right? And it shows up with God because of the prayers. And so he's got this wonderful thing going on in his heart. And then he's a man of authority. He's a man that gets this kind of thing. Okay, let's just talk about Peter for a second, and then we'll talk about the visions a little bit. But now we got Peter. Now we have a guy who's a Jewish apostle. He is the center of the Christian faith to Jerusalem's ministry and out from there. Him and the other apostles is where all the authority resides. And this is one of the key guys. He is maybe the key guy. Peter is.
Jesus said, you're going to be my rock, Peter.
And he was. And so he ends up being, he's the big influencer with the Jewish Christian. And so God's going to use him, but his pictures are old. He has only old pictures to try and put the new wine in, or try to put in the new picture of the church. Jesus spoke about, new wine, and going, if you put that in an old wineskin, it's going to bust it, right? And so you don't do that. and there's got to be elasticity. And so this is what's going on with Peter too. Peter's pictures won't fit what God's going to do with his church. He's changing it here in this chapter.
Yeah.
And Peter has to be made ready for this. And this is to move from old pictures can be really hard because you don't even have an inkling of what the new thing is.
Yeah, I think as people, it's so easy for us to just say, well, this is just how it's always been.
Or this is just who I've always been.
Yeah. You just can't even see how it could possibly be different or better or worse maybe. I don't know.
You just look at everything the same way, the same time over and over again. You miss out on everything around you, right? You just you have this set decision. This is how I go and do this all the time, that you're missing out on all the other opportunities, right?
Exactly.
Kind of clouded vision for sure.
Old pictures, I think the other thing is to understand is how pictures drive us. That they really are a core of our life.
Yeah.
And if those pictures don't change, it's really hard to produce change.
Yeah.
In any other way. You just can't with logical thought create change. You need a picture first, because that incorporates your whole soul, your whole being.
Right.
So, I think of people, for instance, if they're in a marriage and they only have an old picture,
Yeah.
and they have no sense of a new picture,
Yeah.
that's a really hard thing to change anything in that marriage, because the old picture just controls all the thought. It puts the end dates on some of the thoughts, and you can't start new thoughts. And that's kind of where Peter is at with how he sees the Christian church right now. He sees it as almost like it's a Judaism,
thing, yeah.
but it's Jesus, guys.
Yeah.
It's no more law, but it's now Messiah, and he's come to us, and it's really us Jewish people still.
Yeah.
This is going to get blown out of the water here.
It's so funny too, because Jesus spends so much time kind of painting that picture in his life, and he's trying to show them all the time this change that needs to happen, and it takes a long time. Well, it takes all the way till now for the apostles to kind of turn that light bulb on. I think of even when Jesus goes into Samaria and they're like, oh, we don't go there, or all these other times he's like, this is what we do as Christians. He's like, I don't know how you don't get this math, but it took him a little while till the math kind of works out here. So
I agree, and I think it really tells us how powerful pictures are.
Yeah.
And this was ingrained in these guys since, they were knee-high to a grasshopper, right? So these guys have had this constantly inundated on them, and to change those pictures would take an act of God, and he did do an act of God to change it.
That's right.
So he here's Peter. He's in Joppa, not far off of where the other guy is, and he's kind of catching, I think, a break. And he's at a friend's.
Yeah.
And it's by a seaside resort, Well, I'm going to put the word resort in there. Because seaside.
Yeah.
And at noon, this is the previous day, Cornelius. Cornelius gets his vision at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Peter, the next day at noon, he goes up on the roof of the house, looking at the sea, I'm sure.
He's
and he gets hungry, orders lunch, and then he falls in a trance. Right?
dang.
Yeah.
This is very aggressive on God's part.
Yeah.
He just cut out the seaside picture. He cut out everything and said, you're going to see nothing but what I'm going to show you. And then he shows him this sheet come down from heaven.
Yeah, it's a really cool vision. A sheet comes down from heaven with an assortment of four-legged animals and birds and
Every
reptiles.
four-legged animal and bird.
Yeah.
All of them.
And he,
And lobster was on there.
of
Oh, yeah.
course.
I
Oh yeah, you hate seafood. And then a voice tells him to get up and kill the animals and eat them.
Yep.
And Peter's immediate response, which I think he thought was the right response, was surely no, I would never do that, Lord. I would never eat anything impure. That's never touched my mouth, right? Because that
Jewish
was the
dietary
custom.
laws.
Yeah. So
He's not an Albertan.
he
He said he's not an Albertan, clearly. He didn't have a couple animals dropped already.
That's right. He didn't have that Alberta beef bumper sticker on his chariot. And so the message has to come to him 3 times, and he still doesn't even really fully understand it. But the point being, God has given him this vision of these impure animals, gives him an instruction to kill them and eat. He responds, no, I'd never do that. And the voice says, don't call anything impure that God has made clean.
Yeah.
And
So what happens here, though, is, here's what's gone on so far. Cornelius has had a vision. He's God is creating, not with the angel.
Yeah.
And God is creating movement now,
Yes.
right? He's just moving him. And I think that the key thing, another point is for us as believers is to know, every time God wants to move you, wherever he wants to move you, you have a barrier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Every time, not sometimes. Every time he wants to move you from A to B, you've got barriers.
Right.
Yeah, and if you don't have one, you will make one.
Yeah, exactly.
You will make one.
You
That's a
will.
really good point, Brent.
Yeah.
So with Cornelius, he has barriers, but he's now, because he's got all this great obedience structure and heart for God and people, he's moving forward in this.
His response.
And then you get Peter. He's had this, goes into a trance and has this very powerful vision. And now he is wondering what's going on. And then God speaks to him. There's 3 men at the door.
Yeah.
Okay, I've sent them. I want you to go with them.
Yeah.
That's God's explanation.
Yeah.
He's not telling them what's going on.
No.
But now God is creating movement from these 2 men to come together.
Yeah, he's requiring obedience of both of them, and yet neither of them fully understand, right? He's given them a vision and then instruction that requires obedience, even if they don't fully understand yet, and they won't, and often we don't.
And that's what I meant by we'll create a barrier, is he didn't give Peter any time to work up an excuse in his mind as to why he shouldn't go with these guys.
To reinforce the old pictures.
Or, well, they're not Jewish, so I'm going to stay home. If he had waited a day or two, he probably could have convinced himself not to, right?
Yeah. I find this an amazing piece of scripture because it so, again, kind of unveils our own journey, our own humanity as we walk with God. And I know, like, for me, it's always been the old pictures that would be the holdback. Because I think that's the picture. But pictures from God change. And here we see Peter responding to this, and I'm going to give him great credit. Because when you're indoctrinated in something, from knee high to a grasshopper, that here's how you fix this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And you don't do it any other way. And that's hammered into you. And then to think in any creative way of, maybe there's a better way to fix this, or maybe there's a different plan. That's hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially when it's something like they don't know what's going to happen when they get there. And if it's God's plan, it's going to be probably a good thing, right? But they're like, wow, the rules dictate I should probably stay home. And that's all too often, I think, so that's kind of the way we play things out, instead of just like, let's go and see what happens. I have a conscience, I have a mind that knows right and wrong. Let's go and play the game, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So let's finish off for tonight with these 3 men. They knock at the door. They actually call out, is this the house where Simon Peter is? And of course, Peter comes down because he's been told by the Lord.
Yeah.
Yep.
He's to welcome these 3 men. There are 3 Gentiles. One's a soldier, 2 are servants. And he has them come into his house. This is not kosher. Okay.
Nice.
Really, it's not. They were not to have Gentiles in that house and to be sitting down like that. This was not happening. But it is happening. But look what it took to make it happen. God supernaturally moving 2 men together. Look, if God's going to move you into the best picture for your life, it's got to be his picture. And that means there's going to be some of yours that are going to have to be let go of. They're going to be altered. They're going to be changed. He's only going to bring his stuff from your old pictures into the new. And you're going to run into barriers. Anytime God wants to move you from A to B, expect barriers. And like Brent said, if you don't have them, you'll make them.
Yeah, you're going to
because
want them.
this is not the journey that you saw out of your old pictures.
Yeah.
Look, he may be wanting to move you forward in your relationship with your spouse, with your kids, with your family, relationship with other people, the call of God, even relationship with him. He may want to move you deeper and further out there. Know you're going to hit barriers, but you must have this pre-obedience that these 2 great men had. That said, if God says it, I'm going to accept it, I'm going to act on it. And you're going to trust him even without the details, because it's him initiating the movement. God bless you. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
is always by my side. The one who reigns forever, he is a friend of mine. The God of angel armies is always by my side. My strength is in your name, for you alone can save. You will deliver me. Yours is the victory. Whom shall I fear? Whom shall I fear? I know who goes before me. I know who stands behind. The God of angel armies is always by my side. The one who reigns forever, he is a friend of mine. The God of angel armies is always by my side. Nothing formed against me shall stand. You hold the whole world in your hands. I'm holding on to your promises. You are faithful. You are faithful. Nothing formed against me shall stand. You hold the whole world in your hands. I'm holding on to your promises. You are faithful. You are faithful. You are faithful. I know who goes before me. I know who stands behind. The God of angel armies is always by my side. The one who reigns forever, he is a friend of mine. The God of angel armies is always by my side. I know who goes before me. I know who stands behind. The God of angel armies is always by my side. The one who reigns forever, he is a friend of mine. The God of angel armies is always by my side. The God of angel armies is always by my side.
Good evening. Earlier this evening in our devotional, you were introduced to a man named Cornelius, who's described in the beginning of chapter 10 as a devout man of God who gave generously to the poor and prayed regularly. When the angel appeared to Cornelius in verse 4, he says to him, "Your prayers and gifts to the poor have come up as a memorial offering before God." I mean, this is just amazing to me that Cornelius's prayers and gifts to the poor have built up this memorial with God. God has paid attention. He's noticed. He's seen the heart that Cornelius had, the heart behind his prayers and his acts of service. Cornelius's faith and works came together with this true heart of service and love for God, and it built up a memorial to God. Now, I want to encourage you tonight that you too are building up a memorial with God. It's hard sometimes when we can't see exactly what God is doing, but your prayers, your acts of service, your life lived in devotion to God, that is building up a memorial with God. He is paying attention. He is at work in and through you. You may not be able to see it right away, but you can trust that your heart is seen by God. He knows your intentions. He sees your acts of service. He hears your prayers. You're not just calling onto some blank nothingness on the other end. You're talking to God who cares about you, and you are building up a memorial with him. So just be encouraged, be blessed, and I hope you'll enjoy the rest of your evening.